Before I begin, I'm just going to make a pitch for adoration. People are still needed to sign up, and I was reminded of a comment I had made last year, and maybe you recall this, that 5 to 10 minutes for laity before the Blessed Sacrament is the equivalent of the hour that God asks of us as priests and religious and bishops. So don't think by giving just a few minutes that you are somehow letting God down. It's the effort. God knows your responsibilities, your first vocation to family. But again, I encourage you to please sign up. Now, if you're retired and you have no financial worries, you can't pull the family card and say that I'm giving you 5 minutes. So I have been, again, in keeping with the theme, chosen to serve, and I'm very grateful for some reflection questions that helped shape my talk. And to those, not just from the small kingdom we call Spokane, Washington, but to those of you who may be heard before, some of this may be like a summer repeat, but it's not meant. I think it's to keep with this theme of service. So I've been asked to give my vocation story, and I'm glad that I was introduced with some brief facts, because somewhere people are mixing stories about my life. A little bit of this, a little bit, they don't have my right schools. And but I am actually from San Francisco, so you, again, may have heard this. There was a time when it was very Catholic San Francisco, and there's always this panic look on their face. But Baltimore, St. Louis, and San Francisco were the Catholic cities. I would be prejudicial to think that San Francisco might be the most beautiful, but that said, I am one of 7 children, and we grew up in the city. My dad was born and raised and went to Catholic school. His parish was Mission Dolores. And my mom was born in the Mojave Desert, and she and her identical twin were the part of a family that was a mixed. My grandmother, my mom's mother, was a non-Catholic Baptist who had 3 children, and met my grandfather, who was from Butte, Montana, who was a non-practicing Catholic. And so they married, and my mom and my aunt were born, and then later on a younger brother. It was interesting that my mom and my aunt were not baptized until they were 6 years old. And there were friends that were from Butte, Montana, that lived in Southern California, and when my grandfather and my grandmother visited, they found out that the twins were not baptized, and they had them baptized. And at the age of 6, Tom and Irene Collins were the family, and I'm named after Tom Collins, and my aunt, my sister Irene, after them. So here was the witness of one practicing Catholic to encourage. Now, when my grandmother, my mom's mother, and a half-sister and a little brother were killed in an auto accident when my mom and my aunt were only about 21. They were killed up in Oregon. Eventually, my grandfather came back to the faith and was very, very active before he died. My dad's family was obviously always practicing Catholic from San Francisco. His father died when he was a young boy, and they moved him with his uncle, Bill Morelli. My dad's half Irish and Italian. My mom, of course, would be all of Irish background. But Bill Morelli, an electrician, took care of them. They were in that strong Catholic school, which really made life in urban environments much more, as Aristotle said, virtues are necessary for cities. And I'm convinced that if you pull the church out of cities, you have just survival of the fittest. That's why I believe it's easier to turn vocations around in rural areas than urban areas, because as we know, the urban life, the Catholic parish, the Catholic school, the sisters, the priests, in most places, that has changed dramatically. But all that said, I attended Catholic school. I had the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul in grade school, and I had the De La Salle Christian Brothers in high school. And then I went to the Jesuits at USF, and before entering St. Patrick's Seminary. Now, a little background. The grade school that I went to, and I was there last week because my mom's twin, the widow Lee, as the Irish say, the widow Daly, before I went to Spokane in the fall of 14, my dad died when I was only about 30. But I had my aunt's funeral in the parish in San Francisco, where the Daughters of Charity are still in the school. The school was late to be constructed in San Francisco. Most of the time city schools were built probably the 30s, even the 40s. But this school was built in 65, which is new. It was where I went to grade school, but we moved to another parish, St. Brennan's, when I started high school, where my younger two brothers and sister went. But when they were going to build this school, it was interesting. 3 religious orders of women competed to get that school. Imagine that, 3 orders. St. Joseph's Sisters wanted it because the pastor liked them. The Presentation Sisters had this whole corridor of San Francisco. And the Daughters of Charity had a school in downtown San Francisco where my mom and my aunt attended when they moved from Southern California when they were in 3rd grade. And the daughters wanted the school. So my mom and the principal, Sister Margaret, buried miraculous medals around the construction site. And the daughters got the school. And to this day, the daughters are still in the school, whereas all of those other orders are essentially, maybe St. Joseph's doing better, but the Presentation Sisters just sold their mother house and the remaining rest home. So again, something about the role of Mary in my life. Now, the question is, when did you receive your calling and how did it happen? Again, you might know this. Growing up, my cousins lived 2 blocks away. There were 5 boys and 1 girl, and the Lees over 9 years, and the Dalys had 4 boys, 3 girls over 16 and a half years. So my brother and I would serve, my cousins served. The rectory would always ask for our schedule for the summer. Now, my dad would take anyone basically potty trained away from my mom for a week's vacation, where we would go with my dad up to the mountains, and then we'd all go together in August. That was it. So my mom says, you tell the rectory, this is the time, and you're serving the rest of the day. So my cousins tried the same stunt, but our mother said no. So I was assigned in the summer going into 8th grade with a buddy of mine, Bob Sinti, to serve weekday Mass at 5 p.m. Now, some parishes, even with girls serving, you can lucky to get servers on Sunday. But we had 2 altar boys in the morning at 8, 2 at 5 p.m. On a weekday. The church was being painted, and Father Mike Burns was the associate pastor, as we called him then. And he said, you can see right now we're in the convent chapel, maybe seats 25 people. Only one of you is needed to serve. And for whatever reason, I remember saying yes. Now, I believe that small yes enabled me to say greater yeses as I grew older. But when I became vocation director, I was asked, when do you think? And I would say that was it. That's when I think I didn't know what I was saying. I just said yes, I'd serve. And I'd ride my bike to Mass. And when my mom and my aunt celebrated their birthdays, they wanted it in that convent chapel, and several of the Daughters of Charity were there. And one of them, Sister William Aline, who's a nurse and a great friend of the family and was with my cousins when my aunt passed, said, this is where Tom's vocation was first heard. And it was true. And I don't know why, but I said yes. And the Mass, though we went to Mass each week, it took on something different. I say that because we never know in our lives when the Lord will ask us. Now, for you as lay people in this great ministry of involvement in your parish and also your commitment to Serra, you make many yeses to raise your family in the faith, to remain committed to the faith in spite of years of scandal and disappointment, and the fact that Serra has always remained consistent in your mission to pray for, support, and encourage priesthood and religious life. I'm very grateful to be the Episcopal advisor for Serra USA, working with His Eminence, with Serra International. You have always remained focused on that mission. You did not diversify yourself out of existence. You stayed focused through good times and in bad, in season and out. That said, again, the small yes. When I went on to high school, there was always a great tradition, and when I was talking, when I met Kenneth who worked at Rockhurst Prep, he says, yeah, there's a De La Salle in Kansas City, so there's a little video clip. And the rivalry between De La Salle, Kansas City, and Rockhurst reminded me of the rivalry between Sacred Heart, my alma mater, the Archdiocese, and Christian Brothers School, and St. Ignatius. And one thing, though, about the brothers, I remember going in now, I was in 8th grade. My sister was home from college, and she said, where are you going to go next year? And there were 3 boys' schools at the time in San Francisco and 10 girls' schools, and there were 40 grade schools. So there were the Marianists, the De La Salle Christian Brothers, and the Jesuits. So I was asked, where are you going to go? And I said, well, I think Father Bert said I should go to St. Ignatius. And my mom turns around from the stove and said, you'll go to Sacred Heart with the Christian Brothers and learn humility. And somebody may have heard this. I said, first of all, I didn't know what humility was, and I didn't know what it meant. But at this funeral of my aunt, there was the dean at the time when I was a senior, and my sister's talking to him, because my oldest sisters went to the Daughters of Charity High School, which was across the street. And this brother reminds them, tells the story about how at senior year we got into trouble, and this other buddy of mine who's now a lawyer, we're in his office. It was how you get in trouble in an honors English class, but we did. It was a month before graduation. But he said, I remember telling your brother, your type are a dime a dozen at St. Ignatius. Here you stand out. So I thought, well, I was sent there for humility. Anyway, that said, my parents were involved. My dad was a lector. My mom would prefer always to be behind the scenes. She'd rather cook or clean. She just really focused on what I would call the Vincentian teachings about humility, service, generosity. When I came to Spokane, as you know, Spokane was settled in many ways by the Jesuits, and Gonzaga University with basketball is made famous, and also Bing Crosby grew up there. I've been accused of trying to replace 135 years of Ignatian spirituality with Vincentian spirituality. Because you know, when it comes to the Jesuits, they take great pride in their humility. So, anyway, in college I was thought I'd be a lawyer. I was accepted to law school. I went into St. Patrick's Seminary, and it had the Sulpician Fathers. So once again, it's continuing this French school of spirituality, which is very Marian-centered, and also the great emphasis on service. Looking back, I could see very much the hand of God now as I reflect on my life and the people. The older I get, the more grateful I am to the people who played a role in giving witness to the faith, whether it was my family or my teachers, the coaches, my cousins, the whole experience. So I believe, now today I was telling someone, very grateful to God. When I came to Spokane, there were 3 seminarians. And we're a smaller diocese of roughly about 100,000 Catholics in the eastern third of Washington state, which is more farming. We have the snow, not the rain. We have mountains, and it's a beautiful area. It borders the tip of Idaho. And in that experience of the Church of Eastern Washington, we've been blessed now. We will have 18 seminarians next year. So I only have really about 36 priests active. And I do believe it. When I came, I said, when there were only 3, and the college seminary had 5, and which was rebuilt in 2009, and the men go to Gonzaga. I thought we're going to do the 6th decade of the Rosary for vocations, and we're going to ask Mary's intercession. Now, the Diocese of Spokane is the only diocese in North America under the patronage of Our Lady of Lourdes. And prior to being named there, I would help lead pilgrimages with college students and high school students to Lourdes. And so when I received the call from the nuncio to go from San Jose, which I was there for 4 years as auxiliary, to Spokane, to me it was providential to be assigned to Our Lady of Lourdes, the diocese entrusted to our Blessed Mother. So I asked the people of God, and those from Serrans from Spokane know this, to begin that decade and to begin with prayer, because it's not about programs first. It's always about prayer. Beg the harvest master is a very clear directive. I was fortunate to work with Archbishop Niederauer in my last years as vocation director and president of a high school, and I learned so much about him. There was a very bright man, but a very humble and prayerful man. And my priesthood, again, I was in a big parish with a great pastor, Monsignor Keene, and the other priest was Father Healy, and the other priest was in residence was Kennedy. So it sounded like a very good law firm of Keene, Kennedy, Daly, and Healy. But Keene was a bright man. He'd spent time in schools and had a great devotion to the sick, and was very present, and his priority was the grade school. And there I taught, and then eventually was assigned for almost 20 years as a teacher at Marin Catholic, where I became the president the last 8, but I was also vocation director. So seeing the hand of God in these assignments, every parish, Our Lady of the Visitation grade school, the Sacred Heart for the high school, Our Lady Loretto, my first assignment, St. Mary's as a pastor of a country church while teaching, Our Lady of the Rosary Chapel, St. Vincent's School for Boys, which was a Sunday assignment of an orphanage, and then Our Lady of Lourdes. How I see now so much the call to serve, but being directed by the hand of God. There's a line in the breviary, I think it's one of the Office of Readings, and I love this line: "My son, give me your heart. Note carefully the way I point out to you." And that's a great lesson for us about how the call to serve comes. It is the Lord who invites, the Lord who reveals, and the Lord who sends. And we have to cooperate with that. As I said, the call to be a bishop, I received a phone call. So each bishop probably has a story to tell. And when I was at vocation director, that was also as president of high school, we were at St. Patrick's Seminary. It was a meeting between the vocation directors and the rector, a vice rector, and the bishops who sent men to the seminary, and they met with the rector, we met with the vice rector. Before the meeting began, there was a call. They gave me the phone. They said, the Archbishop's secretary would like you to call him. So I called her, and she said, the nuncio has phoned for you. This is his phone number. You're asked to call him. And so I went out. It was February. It was cold. And I stopped at the Blessed Sacrament Chapel at the seminary. I said a prayer, and I went out to the baseball field, and I was on the phone, and I called the nuncio. And he said, the Holy Father would like to appoint you, and there was a rustling of papers, so he was making other phone calls. And he said, Auxiliary Bishop of San Jose, California, do you accept? And I said, well, I don't know. I guess so, yes. And so in that hesitancy, he said, well, let me tell you, when I worked in the nuncio's office in the Holy Land, many a day I'd walk the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and I recall Jesus, as he invited those first men to follow him, they left everything, and you must do the same. And he said, this call is confidential. I will phone you tomorrow, and that ended the call. And of course, and the bishops here would probably also share this. There's always that shock. What does this all mean? And to paraphrase from the preface of The Funeral, Life is Changed, Not Ended. So you kind of keep that in mind. And eventually, again, as I said, I was an auxiliary, and before going to Spokane. We were at our fraternal dialogues at the bishops' meeting in San Diego. And it's kind of like a talk show. I think it's meant to be the Kinder, Gentler Bishops' Conference. And so we were giving questions, and in my small group, the question was your motto and your crest, which the bishop has. One of the guys who's from the Midwest said, well, at my time, that was triumphalistic, so I don't have a motto and I don't have a crest. Well, my motto is, in your hands, Lord. And I chose that because when I started in the summer going into teaching high school, I was in the chapel of our retreat house. It was about 7 o'clock at night. And I knew of this school. It was in the same county where I served. I knew kids who were going there. I didn't know, though, how bad it was. That said, I'm sitting there, and I just felt overwhelmingly those words, into your hands, Lord. As I've never experienced, I believe, the Lord speaking to me before. It always resonated with me, and I think it was very insightful. the school was out of control. Just complete. When a Catholic school goes off the rails, it gives pastors heart attacks and it brings people awfully close to losing their faith. Over a period of time, it was turned around, and it's a great school now with the Ann Arbor Dominican sisters teaching, a solid administration. But into your hands, Lord, always stuck with me as a prayer. And when I was asked to choose as bishop, that was very natural. And my crest, of course, reflects my experience. The Archdiocese of San Francisco, the coat of arms for the name in Irish, Daly, the mountain, which was in Marin County, which is significant, and the cross and the M from the back of the miraculous medal, which, because the sisters taught me, and a great devotion. What prepared me to be the bishop? Well, the words of St. Vincent de Paul, one of his many practical insights. Now, as a sidebar, many times people would just reduce Vincent de Paul to soup kitchens and caring for the poor, but he did far more than that. He was one of the great reformers of the seminary system, which needed to be implemented after Trent. He had the ability to be friends with wealthy people, but not to be bought by them. Sometimes you have priests you always seem to have wealthy friends. No wonder you're always traveling with them. You almost become personal prelature ministry. That wasn't him at all. Many things he wrote were so practical for the formation of priests and the rejuvenation and renewal of priestly vocation. But one of his great quotes is, "Grace is necessary to begin and ever more necessary to persevere to the end." Now think about that, the grace of God. The older I get, again, the more grateful I am. But I recall, and again, I've spoken about this before, and I really stress this with the seminarians. Humble people are grateful people, humble, grateful people are generous, and humble, grateful, generous people have peace and joy in their life. Too many people, I'm thinking of one of the priests who was a vocation director in California, I looked at him, and he had, and I may be mispronouncing it, what the Italians would always call the muzzolungo, the long face. The Irish have it much more descriptive. He had the vomit face. And so I told the bishop, who I know, and I said, "You have to replace this guy. He looks like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, like a So now you don't want the sappy smile that's not genuine. It's like there's some of our brother bishops who are in more challenging assignments, and there's all sorts of pictures of them on their Facebook with shooting wild buffaloes and all this other stuff. And I thought, they already have their resumes faxed out. They know where they want to go next. And I thought but there's always this big sappy smile as they're holding a halibut, a 600-pound halibut or something. So, but a genuine joy that comes from doing the Lord's work and knowing that all depends upon Him. So, with that said, I learned how to be the call to serve as a bishop from being the president of a high school. Because the high schools, the diocesan high schools in the Archdiocese of San Francisco are unionized. So sitting through negotiations is the equivalent of time off in purgatory, because you're dealing with something that is not of God. I mean, it's a secular union plunked into a Catholic school system with the same adversary relationships to the mission of the church. Now, the bishop joins in, and bishop and his eminence will know, sometimes dealing with priests, it's good to have training with unions, because because as though I've been tempted to be like President Reagan when he threatened and fired the air traffic controllers, you remember that, you can't fire these men unless you have 5 guys ready to take their spot. Nothing gets priests more enthused about what they're doing is knowing they could be replaced and sent out to some distant land bordering the northern kingdom of Canada in our diocese. So, but that, I think, helped prepare me in this call to serve. There's no question about that. Thomas Merton, when he was talking about when he was ordained Trappist, in his writing, there's a great line. He said he had this great joy that the people had gone to Columbia with him in kind of his wild pre-conversion life. And he said, "I was prayed to this moment." And I would say I was prayed to this moment to be, I never thought I'd be a bishop. I thought I didn't study in Rome ever. It just seemed bishops appeared. I know vocations take great effort, but I just think, as another one of Archbishop Niederauer's great lines to me, he said, Tom, just always remember this. A pastor might get killed in a car accident, and you may have to struggle to replace him. If you and I get killed in a car accident, we're always going to get replaced. They're going to find a bishop to... So I said, just remember who's irreplaceable and who isn't. So, the question is, what do you feel the role of the Holy Spirit is for the faithful when listening how they're called to serve? As we go around with confirmations, and I finally finished the confirmation season. So we're only 24,000 square miles. We're not 55,000 square miles like the Diocese of Helena in western Montana. But as I sat next to the Bishop of Fairbanks, the Diocese of Fairbanks is essentially the size of Texas, where most places can only be visited by either plane or snowmobile, and very few by car. But it is a long drive, and last Saturday I drove 450 miles for 2 confirmations. And the last third of the confirmations, a seminarian, a great young man just entered the seminary, did his propedeutic year at St. Francis, Milwaukee, and will be going into pre-theology. We had a chance just to talk about his call and all of that. But I've been emphasizing in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which I think are very much needed today. And now, it depends upon our age and our experience, but I have focused on wisdom, fortitude, and awe or fear of God. Wisdom, as you know, is intelligence and education with humility. If you pull humility out, you're arrogant. So wisdom is great. To be able to be wise, you can be young and wise and old and foolish. So in the decisions that you and I make, you as lay people, the various decisions, it's always to seek God's will. For it is in God's will there is peace. That doesn't mean we don't have difficulty and anxiety, but in the end, doing God's will always brings peace. Wisdom is very important with the Holy Spirit when we are choosing to serve. Fortitude, the ability to be committed. I was just thinking as I would have a classmate in Boston, and he started out as a Benedictine from St. Anselm's in New Hampshire. And they sent 4 seminarians to a prep school in Portola Valley, which is a wealthy suburb of San Francisco in the hills of San Mateo County. And it's wooded with horses, and it's if you live in the Silicon Valley, you work there. You never want to live in Santa Clara County, where San Jose is. You want to live in Woodside or Hillsborough, or if you really want to stick it to them, you live up in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. But Woodside, it was a monastic school, prep school. And Casey was with them, and then he left after second theology, worked, and then joined the Boston Archdiocese, where he's from, was ordained. He's pastor in South Boston. I was just looking at the guys in our class that were ordained, who left and who persevered. Those of us still in assignments are in the minority. Why is it that people cannot persevere in doing God's work? They lack fortitude. They don't call upon that gift of the Holy Spirit. The other thing, they're all important gifts, but I think in the technology and this age in which we're in with AI and everything else, we can never lose fear and awe of God. That God continues to surprise us. That God chooses us, weak individuals, as we used to say in the preface to the Martyrs, you choose the weak and make them strong and bearing witness to you. That's all of our lives. He chooses the weak and makes them strong and bearing witness to them. So to be in awe of God, to be in fear of God, He's done so much for us, ultimately giving up His Son that we might have eternal life. So think, all of us are confirmed, I would imagine here. Think of those gifts, study those gifts, and know that they're always available for us to call upon the Holy Spirit to help us learn to serve. To be generous, as we heard earlier about the pastor, who was very generous with his time. Thinking again of another priest, he is very, I don't know if this is, and of course this is the Midwest, he's very German and very structured. And I call, when he's talking to me about availability for the people, I said, first of all, you are not busier than me as a bishop. This is when he was a parochial vicar. I said, structured generosity or scheduled ministry can easily become selfishness. And I think, who are the ones we remember? They were available to us. Young people, in that study about why people live the faith, going, gone, there's the injured, the drifter, and the dissenter. What was common to study why kids leave the faith. It was conducted by St. Mary's up in Winona. And the injured, something, great Catholic family, then a divorce happens, someone dies, and it really rattles them. The second, the drifter, the families relocate, suddenly they're not known in their parish, and they don't know where to turn. The dissenters we've always had. They're like John's 6. They can't accept the teachings on whatever it is, life issues, marriage, and they walk away. But what is characteristic in each of those three categories, the injured, the drifter, and the dissenters, they lacked an adult in their life who could speak to them about a committed Catholic faith, even with difficulties and questions and struggles. And the second is a peer or peers who are trying to live their faith. Well, spending most of my priesthood in Catholic schools, that's what a Catholic school should do. Provide the environment where all adults witness and young people experience what it is to follow Christ in season and out, to be committed to the faith. Now, as I get to know some of you, you talk about, you used to be, you kind of drifted away in your Catholic faith in the early years, but you came back. And part of the way you are giving to the Lord something from yourself is your commitment to ceremonies. And that's so important, to keep that in mind. But to model for our young people what it means to be choosing to serve, but doing it for the Lord. A Jesuit who runs our spiritual life at our college seminary is John Murphy, and I knew John Murphy from his time he taught high school in California, and we've been friends 30 years. He was talking to a Jesuit friend of his who had taught at Georgetown. He was getting ready to retire. And he said, I've been doing God's work, but I'm not so sure it was always God's will. And think about that. That's a very good distinction. Are we doing God's work, which I assume all of us are, but is it God's will? Like some priests come to me with projects. There's one particular priest, he always has a big idea. He wants me to pay for it, to develop it, but he'll staff it, and so often I think, well, he's probably, as the Irish say, blowing the heart up his arse about that. And but are we doing God's will? And it's the Holy Spirit that helps us to discern. Sometimes, you'll have someone, I'll ask a priest to take an aside. I don't feel called to that. No, you just don't want to do it, and you're rapping it in God language. Yeah. Sometimes when I want to make a point, I'm going to say, the Blessed Mother told Vincent de Paul last night, and Vincent de Paul told me this morning, you're going to do this. The question is, finally, what do you see as the global challenges facing the faithful in discovering their own call to serve? We have to be honest. Indifference, hostility, relativism. Sometimes even within our own church. And I spoke last in Florida when we had the rally about what I thought were the reason why we have weak leadership at times in the church. And I'm just talking about as bishops. Fear, compromise, and lack of belief. That's what I think leads to poor leadership. And that's one of the challenges that the laity face. Do they look to us as bishops? The big issue now in Washington State is the Attorney General who became governor is trying to get us to break the seal of confession. He tried it as Attorney General. He's Catholic, so-called Catholic. He went to schools. And so I was very strong 2 years ago that we can't compromise on this. And then he reasserted his effort. And fortunately, the Justice Department now has sued the state of Washington over this because they see it as anti-Catholic. Now, this would not have occurred, not to talk politics here, but this certainly would not have occurred at another time. But it does now. And so we have to be very cognizant of the fact that indifference, hostility, and relativism are the challenges we face. But as I said before, and you've heard, there's never been the best times for the church. There have been better times, but there's not been best times. And whenever we get discouraged, just think of all that happened in the French Revolution. But then what happened post-revolution, this great holiness in the country of France that very much affected Canada and the United States by missionaries coming. Takes hard work to do God's will and his work. But as Jesus said, learn from me, for I'm meek and humble of heart, and turn to me, all you who are burdened. You see, what he asks of us in choosing to serve is not beyond us. Now we have to have balance in our life, and that's where our prayer is so important. Whenever we face something that is just beyond us, a simple bit of advice given to me by a very holy woman. Just say simply, Lord, I give this to your will. I give this person to your will. I give this project to your will. I give this thing I've been asked into your will. As I began these confirmations, and there's one parish where it was, and fortunately the seminarian was there to experience it, there is a very untalented person singing who is in a folding chair yelling into a karaoke machine with all the synthesizers, and I don't know what the song was, but as I know as the motorcade was leaving, my head was throbbing from, I had to prepare the sermon. Now when we get here, this is the worst music in the diocese, and no, we were not disappointed. It was, but I said, God, I give this to your will. And seriously, and from far more seriously, I had to remove a priest for misconduct. And now it looks like it's much more serious and theft. And I was at the parish along with the vicar general, the chair of our review board, a counselor from the review board, the police officer retired who's the investigator. Some of this group of people didn't believe it. As the vicar of priest called me, he said, well, there was a run on the pitchfork and torches at the Ace Hardware store before they met with you. And what is it? Well, I ended the presentation, the truth will set you free. Now we're coming back for part 2 when the audit is going to be conducted. But I said, Lord, I give this gathering into your will. What, Jesus, do you want me to say to them, and what do they need to hear? Hopefully things are going to be reined in the church in Germany. I think your evidence maybe is more knowledgeable of the international picture, but Germany had all these plans for changes in church teaching. It seems to me pretty much rooted in the fact they're afraid of losing that state tax that supports the Church of Germany. Now, if money is the reason for changing church teaching, I can't think of something that displeases the Lord more than that. But we have to recognize that's going on in our church. And how do we, in the United States, hold the line to serve? Well, if we want to grow in holiness, once again, that path is humanity, accepting our weaknesses, our struggles, and God's grace that builds on our weak nature. It's humility, knowing that all that we have we received, as Paul said, and it's having a sense of humor, not taking ourselves too seriously. There's too many people who really love to have their importance felt, as Jesus was talking about the Pharisees. And I think when we deal with all of this, we can't lose heart, and we should strive for holiness. That's how we remain faithful. The priorities I've had as the bishop of the Diocese of Spokane was essentially vocations, education, and salvation. Now, it's not prophetic that I chose those. It just seemed to be those are what characterized my life, what I did as priesthood prior to being a bishop, and what the diocese needed. And I think we do the Lord's will and work when we quietly pray. As we heard, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. But how often it is, listen, Lord, your servant is speaking. So we have to back from that. So again, the call to serve, we can't give what we don't have. That's why it's so important for us to pray each morning, to pray throughout the day, the sacrament of reconciliation, Mass, our ability, because it is not complicated what Jesus gives us to do. He asks us, though, to be faithful. My son, give me your heart. Note carefully the way I point out to you. That could be the prayers that Jesus speaks to us, his words to us, and we should have the grace in our life to open our heart so that we can, in fact, choose to serve each day of our lives. So thank you.